Hi, and welcome to a chat with Elise Stefanik, the Republican incumbent running for re-election to the United States Congress in the 21st District. I'm Jared Stam, editor at Manchester Media, and today I'm being joined by our publisher and owner, Mark Vinciguerra, and our reporters, Jay Mullen and Austin Crozier. We're pleased to be sitting down together in Manchester Media's offices to discuss the issues facing the residents of the 21st District and Congressperson Stefanik's positions and plans. So thank you for being with us today, Elise.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Let's get started. So the first question is just tell us a little bit about yourself and how do you explain your wide appeal through the 21st District?
So I currently am serving in my third term. I was first elected in 2014. I'm a native of upstate New York. I grew up in my family's small business. Small businesses are obviously the economic engine of the entire New York 21st Congressional District, particularly our rural communities and main streets. Since my first election, I've been proud to keep my promises to the constituents of the district, being very active at community events. I've participated in over 1,200 community district events, and a number of those are right here in Washington County, including in Granville. And they range from when there was the Habitat for Humanity build in Granville earlier this year, as well as the trivia night locally to raise money. I highlighted my small business that I supported with the Paycheck Protection Program, Morris's Pizza, right in downtown Granville. So I've been an active presence in the community. This district notably is the biggest district by far in New York State and one of the biggest east of the Mississippi. So I have 194 towns and villages, but I really prided myself on being accessible. One of the most important jobs of a member of Congress is constituent services, and this district in particular has very unique needs. One is the fact that we have more veterans in this district than any other district in New York State. That's obviously tied to the history of military service, but I've been able to claim over $4 million of VA benefits to veterans in this district. So that's individual veterans who have reached out about various cases. That's thousands of veterans we have helped personally. In addition, we also have the highest percentage of seniors in this district compared to other congressional districts in New York. So it's a very aged district, and I've been very focused on Social Security benefits, helping seniors work through that bureaucratic challenge sometimes with the Social Security Administration. We've claimed over 2.6 million of Social Security benefits. On broader policy issues, there's a number of issues that I'm very proud to have delivered results to the district. Number one, I'm proud overall to be in the top 5% most bipartisan members of Congress. I know that as people watch the news, there's a lot of focus at the national level of sort of the divisive issues. But if you look at my voting record, I'm very proud to be in that top 5%. That's as rated by the Lugar Institute that does a report card at the end of every Congress. Importantly, in this district, I've advocated for agriculture and farms. We know, whether it's in Washington County or really all counties in my district, that agriculture is a really important backbone of the economy, whether that's standing up for our dairy farms, which are particularly important in Washington County, or our apple growers and apple producers who have challenges related to seasonal workforce. And then, of course, my advocacy on the House Armed Services Committee when it comes to rebuilding our nation's military and being the chief advocate for Fort Drum. So I'm continuing to work hard. This year has been a really unprecedented year for everyone, including how we're sitting here today. So everyone has adjusted and been impacted by the COVID pandemic. My focus from the start of this crisis was making sure that we were responsive to the needs of our community. And that has meant delivering specific, significant funding for hospitals, particularly hospitals in rural community health centers. I deliver over $165 million of hospital funding, and in many cases, those hospitals had been left out of previous rounds, and I was able to advocate and work with the Department of HHS to get funding specifically to Glens Falls Hospital and Hudson Headwaters, which is important in this region of the district. In addition, some of the small business challenges, obviously on TV, people are seeing the help we gave to Morris's Pizza, which faced unique challenges having just opened, but importantly, our tourist-related businesses and seasonal businesses, which are important to the district, were not initially eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, we were able to work with the local chambers of commerce, the local businesses, to rewrite that eligibility requirement by the Department of Treasury. We turned that around in 48 hours, and that's been a big help to our seasonal businesses. Have a lot more work to do as we overcome COVID. I'm supporting and advocating for direct funding to K-12 school districts, additional funding for hospitals, funding for state and local governments. I'm on the bipartisan bicameral SMART Act, but that's broadly sort of where we are today and what I want to highlight. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you.
All right, Elise, I'll take the next one. Again, my name's Austin Crozier. I'm the reporter for the Granville Sentinel. For more than 7 months, upstate New Yorkers have been living in fear and worry of spreading the coronavirus. What are some examples of plans or actions you look to put into place to transition out of COVID-19 and return to normalcy?
Well, first of all, I want to thank our county public health officials and particularly our healthcare workers at our hospitals locally. I think it is important that we recognize that in the North Country, we've kept consistently the lowest positive COVID rates of any region in the state. That has been consistent from the start of this crisis to where we are today. What I believe we need to do is continue to fund at the federal level testing, to continue to be the leading nation in the world when it comes to our testing capacity. In addition, I think making sure that we have domestic manufacturing of PPE and ventilators. That's not only a lesson this year and now, but it's important for preparedness in the future. Funding for state and municipal governments is important, particularly because New York State is the epicenter, was the epicenter. And I am on a bipartisan bill to do so, and we're working to get that in a final COVID package this year. The economic impact on families and small businesses has been significant. I support an additional round of stimulus direct payments, and for small businesses, I believe they should be able to apply for an additional round of Paycheck Protection Program. We know that program was important. In my district, over $250 million of Paycheck Protection Program loans went out. The vast majority of those are forgivable loans, so essentially grants to help businesses through. But for industries like tourist-related, retail, hospitality that are really hurting, they should be able to apply for a second round.
I got the next question here for you. Kind of a follow-up to that. As you know, President Trump recently, along with the First Lady, contracted COVID-19. After being released from the hospital, he, told the American people to not let the virus, dominate them. What kind of message does that send to the people, and do you think that that could potentially encourage people not to take the necessary precautions for their personal health as well as the health of others?
I think, first of all, this community was praying and hoping for a quick recovery for the President First Lady. And I was astonished and very disappointed to hear my opponent's regional campaign headquarters publicly go on record in the local paper, the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, wishing death on the president and dancing in celebration. That's shameful, and she should condemn it. In terms of the president's statements, I think this has shown that COVID can impact anyone. I mean, you're talking about the most secure person, frankly, on the globe. In my meetings with the president or White House officials earlier this year, they have a very regimented testing program. I mean, you are tested with rapid results before you're able to interact or go into the West Wing of the White House. So I think it shows that this can affect everyone. I think it is important that as policymakers, we focus on both doing everything we can to protect public health, but I understand the president's point that we cannot stay locked in our basements and we have to work to safely reopen the economy. We've learned a lot about this virus over the past many months. We've learned that those that are impacted most significantly are the most vulnerable. We learned that in New York State in a very unfortunate way with the nursing home fatality numbers because of the failed policies from Governor Cuomo. So I think it's important that we continue to take it seriously, follow public health guidance, but also have a path towards safe economic recovery.
Tell us about your thoughts on the Republican Party's attempt to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, and what does this mean for the 21st District during the pandemic and then beyond?
Sure. So when I first ran for office, it was in 2014. That was right after the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And People were facing cancellations of their healthcare policies. Small businesses were left with canceled policies, including my family's small business, and the options were more expensive with lesser choice in terms of the providers that you could go to. So there are significant challenges with the Affordable Care Act. Another issue that I hear about today is the high deductibles, that many of the plans on the ACA have very high deductibles, and people choose not to seek care because they can't afford that out of their pocket. So the costs continue to rise. I believe that any replacement package has to include coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. I have voted in support of legislation that allows healthcare to be purchased across state lines. That works in a region like ours, particularly in this area with New York and Vermont. I also support small businesses being able to pool together to purchase into associated healthcare plans to lower costs for those small businesses that have seen those costs rise. What I don't support, and this is a real choice with my opponent, is moving in a Medicare for All direction. For 2 years, she ran for office with Medicare for All on her website. She has since deleted it and changed her position, but I don't support a single payer healthcare system. And the reason why is I don't think the government is, when I look at the VA, for example, which is essentially a single payer system, we work so hard to help veterans, to help constituents cut through the bureaucracy, making sure it's high quality. And it's not workable in many cases. I think we've made inroads on reforming the VA, allowing people to access care in their communities, not having to drive further, giving them more choice through the VA Choice program. But a Medicare for All approach is not the direction, and that's what my opponent stands for. On healthcare, the one other issue I want to highlight that I've led on is the federally qualified health centers. I've been nationally recognized as one of the leading voices for rural community health centers. I've received an award on that. I led the effort for the 5-year funding for FQHCs, and obviously the role of Hudson Headwaters is so important to rural communities in the district, and we work very closely with them.
Thank you.
All right, Elise, as a self-described strong supporter of the United States Armed Forces, both domestic and those stationed internationally, does military readiness outweigh national debt, whether it be temporary or permanent?
Well, I always side on military readiness. The number one role, I believe, of the United States government is to make sure that we are safe and secure, and making sure that we're protecting our national security. I have seen the devastating impacts of defense cuts firsthand. I have heard that directly from soldiers and servicemen and women who have seen their fellow servicemen and women lose their limbs or lose their lives for lack of training, for lack of investment in military readiness. We have had to really invest to make up for the devastating impacts of defense sequestration, and it's had an impact on this district. If you look at Fort Drum, which is the largest single site employer, not only in the district, but actually in New York State, a lot of people don't know that. They were cut significantly. When I took office, I led the effort, and we were cut the least out of any Army base, but the readiness has a direct impact on the safety and security of our soldiers. When I look broadly at our national debt, we need to tackle it. I mean, I'm of the generation, so are you, that's going to inherit the national debt. We need to focus on agencies and departments where there's duplicative programs. We need to focus on the true drivers of national debt, which is not our military spending. And I believe that we need to focus on economic growth, which we were doing very well prior to COVID. My opponent is on record supporting defense sequestration and the defense cuts.
So my next question for you, you've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but agriculture and homegrown businesses are crucial to the success of Washington County and, you know, the North Country as a whole. How does your relationship with other Congress members and people with political power in New York State ensure the safety of these small businesses?
My relationship with other members? Sorry.
Your relationship with other members with political power, how does that ensure the safety of the small businesses and agriculture in the North Country?
Sure, so agriculture is a very bipartisan issue, and I've worked with colleagues from rural communities, agricultural districts who are both Republicans and Democrats. One example is passing the bipartisan farm bill. Farm bills in the past, so before I got to Congress, can be very divisive We got it done and it was signed into law. There were really important provisions that impact agricultural businesses in this district. For example, the reforms to the margin protection program, which is the sort of dairy insurance for low milk prices. That was not workable. That was one of the biggest complaints I got from dairy farms. We have updated and reformed that program to make it more functioning. Also, the investment in rural broadband was a part of the Farm Bill as well. We have a lot more work to do in that space, but we're making incremental progress. And I think, there are a lot of issues where there's bipartisan support, and agriculture is one of them. So is small business. So when we think about the Paycheck Protection Program, that was almost a unanimously passed bill that I was proud to vote in support of. My opponent criticized that initially. Now she supports it, but her initial instinct was to criticize that. That was a life-saving, business-saving program that benefited small businesses in Main Street. Another issue that has bipartisan support that's tied into small businesses is workforce development and career and technical education, and important support for our BOCES programs and our vocational training programs. That's gotten bipartisan support, not just at the federal level, but partnerships at the state, county, and local level.
Me again. I know that you back the blue and have emphasized that you're supported by law enforcement within the district. So what's your stance on police reform? As a follow-up to that sort of two-part question, what's your stance on the Black Lives Matter movement?
Sure, so this is an important distinction in this race. On law enforcement issues, I am proud to be endorsed by law enforcement organizations. Today we announced the Police Benevolent Association, and that includes our forest rangers in the Adirondacks, that includes our park rangers, as well as the endorsements from the Troopers Association, state investigators, and Border Patrol. We have a lot of law enforcement families in this district, and I'm proud of that support. On issues of criminal justice reform and overall police reform, we did pass criminal justice reform under this president. It's a very important bipartisan results that President Trump has been able to deliver, that we worked with him on, the First Step Act. And then on the police reform, I co-sponsored the Justice Act, and this was in response to the horrific video footage of George Floyd, which those individuals should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the Justice Act bans the chokehold. It also increases training for law enforcement, which is important. I don't think we need to be cutting investment in law enforcement. And third, more transparency in the use of force. So making sure that if you have a law enforcement officer that's transferring from one department to another, that information needs to be transparent. So you don't have a bad apple being able to transfer one to the other. And law enforcement officers support that. That legislation was introduced by Tim Scott in the Senate, and then my colleague in the House, Pete Stauber, who is a former law enforcement officer, so is very familiar with these issues. I think this region, we have very effective law enforcement who proactively reach out to the community. On the question on the Black Lives Matter, every life matters. Of course, Black Lives Matter. Where my disagreement is if you look at the organization, their number one policy priority is to defund the police, which I don't support. That's on their website. I don't support that position. My opponent has voted to defund a deputy sheriff's position in St. Lawrence County, so she is on record supporting defunding law enforcement.
All right, Elise, sticking on the topic of crime, drug overdoses and crime have unfortunately been trending upward in recent years. How do you plan to combat both?
This is, and this year too. I mean, if you look at during COVID, this is one of the, I think, underreported issues of the impacts of this pandemic. So when it comes to increases in overdoses, we have passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, the CARA Act, that provides $6 billion of funding. That's an example of bipartisan support. We've been able to deliver federal dollars in the form of grants to organizations in this district to combat addiction, to support treatment, and to invest in prevention. In terms of, the other part of the question was crime. Was that the other part of the question?
I had crime and drug overdoses, yep.
Okay. In terms of the increase in crime, this is also another area of concern this past year. We've seen the skyrocketing of crime rates in New York State. I'm very concerned about when bail reform is implemented at the start of this year. allowing violent criminals back into our communities, and in many cases, they have committed crimes again, in some cases multiple times. I don't support bail reform. I think we should repeal that very, very flawed state law, which widely has been panned by law enforcement officials on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats. I also am very concerned about we have constitutional right to speak out and protest in this country. There is not a constitutional right to riot and loot and destroy public property. And I believe that our leaders at the state level, the governor as well as the mayor of New York City, need to speak out when it comes to the rioting and looting and destruction of public property. In our district, I think we have respect for rule of law in this district, which is really important. But the increases of overdoses and drug use, that is an issue that impacts rural and suburban and urban areas.
So are you asking for more leadership from the state? Is that what you're saying?
When it comes to addressing the increasing crime rate in New York State, absolutely. We need to see stronger leadership from the governor and mayor of New York City and some of these cities that have seen significant increases in crime.
I have the next question here. As I'm sure you're aware, Whitehall was dealt a significant blow with the recent storms and flooding that took place on August 24th. I was up there the day after, I was covering that, and I had spoken to Dan Steck, who had mentioned that you were trying to get federal funding to help out with that. And I was just wondering if you had any updates on that or how that process was going.
Absolutely. So we are taking a couple of steps. I'm just going to refer to my notes here because this is a very important issue. So first of all, my staff was on site, did a tour with local leaders, and was immediately in touch. I was in touch with the supervisor as well as the superintendent of the school district, because I know the school in particular was very much impacted, and they're still having to really work through that challenge with the mold and the flooding issue. It's unusable. In terms of funding, we announced a significant funding grant that is, let me find the amount here. A significant amount that goes to Whitehall to deal with stormwater. We can get you the details on it. In addition, we worked with the school district and are working through the bureaucracy to get the funding that the insurance has been withholding. We've been on multiple phone calls with the superintendent to work through the bureaucracy of the insurance. The insurance is trying to make it seem like this is not an emergency storm issue, and that it's flood, when we believe this is a storm natural disaster issue. So we will support the school in all efforts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding have been announced through the Northern Border Regional Commission to go to Whitehall.
Thank you.
In terms of the environment, what steps would you take to ensure that a healthy, sustainable planet for the next generation is in place? And what renewable energy sources in particular do you feel we should be investing in our district and in the country?
Sure. So the environment is an important aspect of the greater Adirondack and North Country region. The health of our environment is tied to the health of our economy. Some of the wins that we have been able to deliver, and I've been a leading voice for, is the permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund that funds local conservation projects, as well as the significant increase in the Lake Champlain Basin funding program we shepherded that through, working across the aisle and across the lake with Vermont, my colleague Peter Welch. That's a win for this region as well. I've also worked closely with Lake George organizations to combat invasive species. On the overall environmental issues nationally, I've voted consistently in support of renewables, solar, and wind. Where I think we need to improve is leveling the playing field for other renewables like biomass, hydro, and nuclear. Biomass and hydro in particular are real economic opportunities in this region, and unfortunately they don't have the same tax incentives that other renewables do. I have one of the most independent records of members of my own party on environmental issues.
Kind of staying on Jared's topic, related to that, what steps do you think we need to take to combat climate change?
Again, investing in renewable energy is important, making sure that we are investing in innovation. We have the cleanest air and the cleanest water ever in our nation's history today, and I think we need to continue working towards that. Also at the local level, I forgot to mention this, the acid rain monitoring program within the Adirondacks, that has federal funds, that's in Raybrook, but it impacts everybody. And just in terms of, it's the only site of its kind in the country. But combating climate change, we need to focus on renewables and make sure that we have level the playing field for those tax incentives.
So my next question correlates with last night's vice presidential debate. So the last question that was asked was interesting in a few ways. 8th grader Brecklin Brown asked, quote, "When I watch the news, all I see is arguing between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizen fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are two candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along?" In his response, Vice President Mike Pence said, "Don't assume that what you're seeing on your local news networks is synonymous with the American people." How does that square with your efforts on behalf of the local media?
Well, I think the national media is a lot more divisive than the local media. I mean, the local media is closest to the people, closest to your audiences, and really tries to inform, I think, the electorate. The national media is very divisive. I mean, if you look at what they tend to focus on, it's the infighting. It's very rare that they highlight bipartisan issues. I think that the local media, particularly the weeklies in this district and the informative, policy-focused TV discussions and interviews, I think that's a really important role that they play. So I would disagree that I think the divisiveness is at the national level of the media and online in particular, and not necessarily at the local level.
And could you just talk a little bit about your support of the Local Sustainable Journalism Act? Just get, because I don't know if our readers or viewers know about that necessarily.
Yes, so obviously this year has been extremely challenging for everyone, but including local small businesses who are media outlets. And it's important to have policies that allow there to be incentives for small media outlets to continue to thrive and survive. I've taken a number of steps and co-sponsored a number of bills to support local journalism. Making sure that you guys can qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program, even if you are partnered with other small outlets under an umbrella, is really, really important. Also, some of the retirement plan issues for local outlets is important as well, but it's an important issue for you.
And so further to that debate question, do you think that the lack of civility and name calling in our public discourse is a problem? And if you do think it's a problem, what can we do about it?
Sure, I think the lack of civility is a problem. I mean, this is a very divisive time. These are serious issues that impact people's lives. I think the focus on policy differences and policy issues is important that the American people know. I mean, my own experience is I myself have been smeared by donors in Hollywood, donors of my opponent. My opponent raised $2 million off of hashtags Trashy Stefanik, which is a sexist smear. She refused to give back those donations. So I think keeping the focus on policy issues is important. For example, in this race, you have two candidates with very different positions. I don't support raising taxes, have never voted to raise taxes. My opponent has done so numerous times. I support bipartisan fixes to the Affordable Care Act. My opponent's on record supporting Medicare for all. I think when you keep the issues on the policy areas, that's important for voters to know. And then I think, answering questions like this is also an important form of accountability.
Elise, my final question for you is that in light of recent polling on the presidential race, how do you think down-ticket Republicans, including yourself, will be effective?
Well, I won this district. I've worked very hard to earn support in this district since I first ran by double-digit wins, putting up the biggest wins in the entire Northeast of any Republican in this region. And I don't have the most Republican district when you compare it to others. The president continues to do very well in this district. You can just take a drive. Only takes like a 15 or 20-minute drive to see the number of signs and how many outnumber the Trump-Pence signs versus the Biden-Harris signs, and that's pretty equivalent when you're driving around the district. Rather than paying attention to national polls, I pay attention to constituents in my district and voters who will elect and employ their member of Congress. So, he's gonna do well in this district. I am very proud that every election cycle, I've won not just Republicans, but independents and a significant percentage of Democrats. And I also am the only candidate that's worked with presidents of both parties. When I first took office, President Obama was in office, and I delivered results with a Democratic president, and I've delivered results with a Republican president. So I'm able to get things done for this district, whether Republicans are in the minority, or whoever has the White House.
Do you have ambitions beyond the House of Representatives?
I am, I never thought I would be in Congress, and I am focused on this job. You have to, as an elected official, make a decision every 2 years. This is a big responsibility. I am 36, there are things I want to do in my life, such as starting a family, different chapters that we have, but I do not have, I'm focused on doing this job. And that this is a big district, it's bigger than some states, and it takes a lot of energy to do this job. I've brought energy to this job, but that's what I'm focused on.
Okay. And now, is there anything else those are our questions, anything else you'd like to tell us that you haven't covered, that we haven't asked about?
No, you've covered a lot.
All right, well, this is great. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy
Of course.
schedule. I know it's very, very busy, and let's see what happens on election day. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.